Yeah.
So what is freeze-dried food? For those of you who still don't know yet, what is freeze-dried food and what is space food, food for astronauts? We present Dr. Sian Proctor, geoscientist, analog astronaut, space chef, with her own website, Meals from Mars. So she will share her experience at High Seas, which is a NASA-funded Mars simulation in Hawaii. And from that experience, she ended up creating Meals from Mars, right? And there you go, Dr. Sian. Please, the screen is yours. We all would love to learn from you.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you about my experience as an analog astronaut and what I've learned from living in Moon and Mars simulations about food, basically meals for the Moon, Mars, and beyond. And so we're really talking about not low Earth orbit, which is the ISS, which sits in microgravity. We're talking about, well, if we go to the Moon with a 16th of Earth's gravity versus Mars, a third of Earth's gravity, what does that mean for eating and cooking? And so when we talk about food in space and the history of food in space, what William was saying before about functionality, it came from food safety standards was the very beginning of food. I mean, you think about the first human in space, which was cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, and basically what they were eating were things in a tube in the upper left-hand corner. Didn't know whether you could even swallow in zero gravity, things like that, because we'd never been there. We could only speculate. But the biggest concern in space exploration has always been about food safety and not getting astronauts food poisoning or sick on the International Space Station, or going to the Moon and eventually to Mars. So a lot of the food is very sterilized, pre-packaged, dehydrated, freeze-dried, or shelf-stable for a long period of time. They do send fresh food up to the International Space Station every time they do a resupply, but it's limited. And again, they have to eat it right away because it will go bad. One of the big staples on the International Space Station is tortillas. It's one of the few ways in which astronauts can take a already prepared, just add water and heat meal and actually creatively combine things to make something a little different than what is going to be pre-packaged. And so this is thinking about not only the history of food, but where we are right now with the International Space Station. So some of the research that's come out of NASA and other space agencies over the years that humans have been in space is about food preservation, something that was talked about by Dr. Martin earlier, and how important it is to preserve food, whether it's fresh or freeze-dried. What's the length in which we're going to be able to use that product? Health and nutrition, how do you keep the astronauts going, especially when you go into orbit and all of your fluids start to shift and food that you normally like, you don't like anymore because of changes in your nasal cavity and things like that. This leads to menu fatigue. And then one of the things that everybody has been touching on is the culture behind food. And so a lot of things that I like to look at has to deal with the psychology, culture, and mood associated with food. So as we go from low Earth orbit and think about exploring the Moon and establishing a habitat on the Moon and then going on to Mars and getting a foothold there, food is a really important thing that we need to consider. And so one of the questions that I have for the people who are listening in the chat, just what would you want to eat on Mars? So if you could eat anything in the world, what would it be and why? And so it's an important question because it gets into the culture, health, and psychology behind food. For me, I know it would be pizza. I would love to be able to have a nice brick oven pizza on the moon. I think that would be my own little restaurant doing that. And so the space agencies are really interested in the future of food. And as a result, NASA funded the high seas missions. They started in 2013. This is a picture of the habitat. It's about 900 square feet, and it houses 6 individuals. So there's living quarters for 6. And I was very fortunate to be part of the first crew to ever live in the high seas habitat. And it was an international crew. And so this is our group. And we became basically analog astronauts. And analog astronauts are people who do research and training in human space flight, but on Earth. And so this is an analog location for Mars or the moon. The high seas habitat sits at about 8,000 feet on the slopes of Mauna Loa, and this is Mauna Kea on the Big Island of Hawaii. So very volcanic terrain, not a lot of vegetation. So again, putting in that mindset of that you're going to be on another planet. And while we lived in the habitat for 4 months, if we went outside, we had to wear a space suit. In that habitat environment, again, as an analog astronaut, we're doing all kinds of research, whether it's exercise and wearing t-shirts that are specifically designed to reduce microbial growth, testing rovers, and looking at different kind of bacteria. But the main thing that NASA funded this mission for, and again, it was for 4 months living in this habitat, was food strategies for long duration space flight. So think about that. That's how invested these space agencies are, that they're putting millions of dollars behind what it's going to be, what the future of space food is going to be like on the moon and Mars. So you can see this was our space pantry. Now for our mission, we could only have shelf-stable ingredients. So we weren't allowed to have fresh food or grow any of our own food. Because again, they were thinking about long duration space flight. So we're talking up to 3 years. What does that mean in terms of what ingredients you can have or not have? And so we spent those 4 months, and the study was basically 2 things. One was we're eating 2 days of the way astronauts eat now, which is this image here on the left. Just add water and heat meals. So everything that you need for chicken a la king with noodles is contained within here. All of the spices, ingredients, all of that. And basically you scoop it out, put it into a pot, add water. So it's just add water and heat. Versus spending 2 days of being able to creatively cook using shelf-stable ingredients or freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables. So this is freeze-dried vegetables, freeze-dried fruit, and freeze-dried meat. And what happens in the freeze-dried process is that you're taking out 98% of the water and then storing it as a shelf-stable ingredient. Again, taking out that water is going to help reduce microbial growth. And as a result of that, it can last a long time period. And then when you go to cook, you will rehydrate this and then make whatever meal you want. And so we spent the 4 months alternating of 2 days of just add water and heat meals and 2 days of being able to creatively cook. And what was interesting was the variety of food that we came up with for creatively cooking. And so this is freeze-dried or shelf-stable ingredients and the different kinds of things that we could create and meal-wise. Now, what's interesting when we think about food is not just the fact that it's food to sustain us for our life, but the culture behind food and thinking about what would you want to eat on Mars, that first question. Well, think about this. What would you want to eat if it was your birthday? you know, or some celebration. And what would that look like? And so in those 4 months, Jahira here had her birthday. And of course, we want to celebrate these kinds of things. And so what kind of food products would we have available to be able to do that? And so what we came away from our 4 months there is that the culture of food is extremely important. For instance, some of Oleg grew up in Russia until he was 12 and then came to the United States. So he brought in a lot of Russian dishes that he made using our space pantry, our shelf-stable ingredients. Jahira grew up in Puerto Rico, so she brought a lot of that culture to her cooking and being able to share that with us. Another thing is the importance of sitting around the table in this environment and the community building, crew cohesion, creativity that is associated with food. All of those things are what makes the meal more enjoyable. And so thinking about those as we go to the moon and Mars are just as important as the ingredients and things that we're going to be taking with us. Now, when it comes to engineering and food, that's something that we're thinking about too, right? Can we 3D print food? How does technology help us when we're talking about environments that are extremely hostile, like space or living on another planet? And so the things that when we're talking about the technology, can we have the variety that we need when it comes to meals? Again, shelf-stable ingredients. You can think about when we're talking about the insects and the byproducts from insects. Well, what if we were to take that ground up floured products along with the oils and stuff and put it into a 3D printer? What could we create? Could we customize content for individual astronauts or not? And how much time and efficiency would there be with this kind of thing? And then we also have to consider the processing of those ingredients. Is there any kind of loss in nutrients or vitamins? And as Chef William was saying, texture. If you're eating something every day that has the same texture, how satisfying is that? And so technology and food culture are things that are extremely important as we think about the future of food in space. I want to play this video for you right now that kind of illustrates some of the extreme thoughts when it comes to what we need versus what we want. So think about this.
So what are you trying to do here?
We're trying to make food better. We wanted to see what balanced diet entails and then meet those requirements as elementally as possible.
So elementally, you mean the sort of molecular nutritional level of the product.
Exactly. Goal was to use science to improve the food system.
Whatever you put in here, you want to say it's better than like the whole meal I just had? I had like eggplant parmesan last night.
Well, it depends what you're optimizing for.
Optimized for pleasure. How about that?
This may not be the most pleasurable meal in the galaxy.
Okay.
However, it is very functional.
Functional food.
Right. Ever since food fortification from a generation ago. I mean, iodized salts, fortified rice, cereal, even macaroni and cheese has to be fortified.
Yeah, it's all the grains.
Nutritional deficiencies used to be just part of life, and now they're gone.
They're gone completely.
Just gone.
This is an engineering problem.
Right.
A food engineering problem.
Food engineering problem. And it's a very complex problem. I mean, it's pretty astounding that we can make something like this that will sit on a shelf without refrigeration for.
So this is an example. I just wanted to show you the first part of that, of thinking about food, functional food versus the pleasure of food. And can we survive on just functional food? And clearly we're creating products that are designed to meet the function that the human body needs to be able to survive. But then there's the whole psychological aspect wrapped around food, the pleasure of eating and chewing and smells and all of that, along with the culture of cooking. And so when we think of the upper left-hand corner, I love the movie The Matrix. and the whole idea of what they're eating in that movie, The Matrix. And if you've seen it, then you know that the villain in this just wanted to be able to eat a steak again. They just wanted to be plugged in and not eat what Neo is eating here, which is functional food. And so when we're thinking about the future of food on Mars, you know, that what was mentioned about the insect-based foods, that's a really important thing that we got to consider. But also we have to think about some of the things that are coming out from cellular agriculture and growing our own meals. And then what are we going to be able to grow with hydroponics? And the big thing about all of this food that we can't forget about is the preservation part. And so when I think about food in space, I also think about food on Earth. And so as we solve for space, we solve for Earth. And there's this cycle where we learn to be more efficient in space, but we bring that technology back to Earth. And then the things that we learn on Earth to make us more efficient and better, we bring that to space. And all wrapped into that is the human culture that we bring with us. And so when we think about space technology and freeze-dried, how can that make us more sustainable on Earth? Well, we've already talked about a little bit the fact that we waste a lot of food, and that is a problem with when you're looking at worldwide 30% of food being wasted because it goes bad or we don't get to it in time. Also in the United States, we're number one when it comes to food waste. So we really need to look at how to be more efficient in this area. And that's where food preservation comes in. And so with freeze-dried technology, again, it's different than dehydration. And so freeze-dried is when you actually freeze the material, the corn in this case, and then you sublimate the water out. So as you can see between these two different images here, freeze-dried, you continue to keep the shape and basic volume of the meat, not volume, but the size. But what's happening is you're taking that water out and you're just leaving the nutrition. Now that's important for space because water has such a high weight content. So shipping anything to space, the more you can reduce its weight, the easier it is to get up there. And that again makes it shelf-stable. For me in my home and how I've been using freeze-dried is that I look at it right now, and from a sustainability component is everything that's in my freezer. How do I take my frozen fruits and vegetables and meats and take them out of the freezer and put them in my pantry? For instance, this would be frozen blueberries versus freeze-dried blueberries. So the frozen blueberries, when they're picked, immediately you got to freeze them and you've got to use energy to keep them frozen until you're going to eat them. And so think about transportation. Not only do you have the weight of the water in the blueberries, you're also using energy to freeze them, and you're transporting them from wherever they've been harvested to the processing plant, from the processing plant to the store, and then from the store to your home, and still yet it's in the freezer using energy until you decide to use that, versus taking the water out of the blueberry when it's harvested, making it shelf stable because it's freeze dried, shipping just the nutrients and not the water, going to the store, again, it's sitting on the shelf and not in a freezer, and then bringing it home and having that be stable for up to a decade. And so when we're talking about creatively cooking, instead of having meals that are already pre-prepared and just add water and heat, how can we bring the art, the culinary arts to space and be able to take these freeze-dried, shelf-stable vegetable, fruits, and meats and hydrate them to make stews and soups and saute them with interesting spices and things like that. Now, when I talk to a lot of people, they're like, well, I can't just eat freeze-dried food. And I don't think that we should, not on Earth or in space. So what I like to advocate is that we should think about any food that we ship internationally, we should package it as freeze-dried, and we should combine those freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables with locally or regionally harvested fresh fruits, meats, and vegetables. So you combine these two things, because if I'm getting my food, my fresh food now from like India or Indonesia, what do we have to do to keep it fresh by the time it gets to me in Phoenix, Arizona, and by the time I buy it and bring it home and cook it? Can that those products from Indonesia be freeze dried and sent to me and then used later on and combined with local ingredients that are fresh here in Arizona? When we're talking about ways in which Indonesia can contribute to space, I think we've already hit on that. And where my research is going now is all in spices. And so my last question to you is, what are the essential herbs and spices for space? Like, what would you think that we would need to take with us? Because our pantry is going to be limited. We can only take so much with us, and we can only grow so much product on the moon and Mars. And so how are we going to, again, avoid that menu fatigue? Well, one of the easiest ways is through spices. And you can imagine taking something like freeze-dried chicken and onions and a vegetable and making it taste different just by the different types of spices that you add to that meal. So that, again, you're being able to be creative, but you're also being able to add some of the culture that is associated with food. So whether you make it taste more Italian or make a curry or just those kinds of flavors that we're used to. And so thank you for listening. And I look forward to hearing what kind of questions we have.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sian, for the presentation. And yes, we saw a lot of spices, and we are a country of spices, which also herbs. We have the herbal medicine. So I think we can select, so it can also, it's all functional. It's not just food, but it's also medicinal plant and also the spices, right? Yeah, I think we have a great selection of it here in Indonesia. And for this hot and spicy food, it's also, we've got plenty, just depending on the, spiciness level. Because speaking honestly, like European food, how long can you take European food for? You go to Europe, you get boring. You look for a Chinese restaurant after a week or something, like, even though the nasi goreng, the fried rice tastes so bad, but it's still like some soya sauce and the Asian taste, So you can only take French food, duck confit and pasta for some time, and then after that you go look for Asian food.
I feel the same way with American food. I'm always thinking, okay, yeah, am I going to eat Asian? Am I going to eat Mexican? Am I going to eat? But American, every once in a while.
Not only it's unhealthy, but Japanese also clean. But yeah, I mean, Japan with JAXA, they've developed a lot of space food for themselves as well. And with the ANA airline, I think it was funny how ANA airline created the space food for a flight to Houston. I'm like, what? No. Maybe space food for pleasure, but not for a long haul flight to Houston. You want all the good stuff.